So before we begin, I want to offer a fair warning to you guys that this video is going to contain very serious subject matter. So if you are sensitive to subject matter such as suicide, depression, things like that, then perhaps this is not the video for you. We're going to discuss things that are very close to myself, and this is probably going to be the most real video that I've ever put out on this channel. So with that being said, and that warning, thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the other side. Okay, look, before we begin, I just want to give a disclaimer. I'm writing this pretty much right after finishing Silent Hill 2 for the first time in my life. And because of this, my thoughts and opinions on this game will be based on that playthrough and that ending. I also want to note that right before playing this, I finished the first Silent Hill for the first time as well. And I will be making comparisons to that one occasionally. With that being said, welcome to Silent Hill. So let's just say from the beginning. For me, Silent Hill 2 did not live up to the hype that everyone made it out to be. And that's not to say the game wasn't good, because it absolutely was. But there were many times that I said on stream while playing this that I felt as if everyone oversold the game to me, which raised expectations to levels that the game couldn't possibly reach. Which, to be honest, isn't at all fair to the game itself. During my stream, there were many times that people responded to me saying that because it was an older game, that was why I didn't feel as they did. But my response is that I play old games basically on a cult-like basis. So let's talk about the things that I didn't like, then go over what makes the game a good game overall. So starting with the controls, and before you go and say it's because it's an old game, calm your tits and hear me out. Movement around the different areas felt sluggish. James himself felt floaty and delayed for everything. This made dodging enemy attacks very difficult, and combined with the odd choice for the game's camera, this led me to taking a lot of unnecessary hits and damage. Opening the items menu can also lead to taking unnecessary damage, as the screen is black in between opening and closing your inventory, but enemies can still move and attack while no image is displayed. This caused me to get into the habit of moving while leaving the inventory screen so as not to take that extra damage. Combat itself was pretty atrocious in this game as well. Every attack seemed to take forever to execute, and because of the massive delay in button input and action on screen, I ended up not using other guns such as the shotgun or rifle, instead relying on the handgun and then curb stomping enemies when they were down. I was absolutely thankful the game had auto aim though, because with the camera, it would have been impossible to play. The camera took some getting used to, but it was finicky at best. I'm not sure why they couldn't map the camera to the right analog stick instead of having this weird amalgamation of a camera that you can't really control. It's as if they wanted it to be fixed camera angles, but not quite. This was a similar issue I had in the first game. The camera alone drove me crazy, especially considering there was a generational leap between the first game and the second game. This could have gone with either fixed camera angles or a completely free moving camera for us to control, but instead we got this mess. And I know that I'm kind of harping on the camera a lot here, but it was one of those things that continuously bothered me throughout the entire playthrough. The best way to put it is that it felt like the cameraman was Lakitu from Mario 64 just floating on a cloud, and if it was a tight corridor, he wouldn't have space to move, so I was stuck with it. So let's tackle the story really quick. Not the full story, and not specifically the story elements themselves, but the way the story was told. Now again, keep in mind, this is my first and only playthrough, and pretty much the footage that you're watching is either from my live stream or just the beginning of the game. So perhaps I missed some things here and there, as most do on their first playthrough. With that being said, I really didn't like the way certain things are told, or not told. And what I mean by this is there was so much that was left ambiguous that it was a bit distracting at times. And don't get me wrong here, I don't mind the leave it up to the player's imagination to fill in the blanks trope, but where people feel the need to come into my live stream and feel like they have to mention how the enemies, such as the nurses or the legged enemies, are a manifestation of James's sexual frustration, it makes me wonder if that's really the case or if that's what the community as a whole has decided it to be. And the way the game used the side characters to explain a lot of the town of Silent Hill and how it works kind of left me with some mixed feelings. Throughout most of the game, I was confused as to whether or not the characters of Eddie, Laura, or Angela were even real. Clearly, Maria was a manifestation of James's psyche, as she was born from his desires of his late wife. But the other characters were not so obvious. Also, can I mention what a bitch Laura is? I know she's an orphan child, but damn. Maybe she was an orphan for a reason. Too harsh? No, I didn't think so. Alright, moving on. It wasn't really until near the end of the game where characters started saying that they were called to the town that I finally realized that these characters were people and not manifestations of James's mind. That these characters outside of Laura were living in their own personal hell. So with those things out of the way, it's time to talk about the things that I did like. Starting with the characters and how they were portrayed. And I know that I just finished saying I didn't like how the side characters told the story of Silent Hill, but the characters themselves had a lot to say. And after finishing the game, I've seen a lot of discussions about Silent Hill 2 and how the characters were drawn to the town to atone for their sins or to deal with their inner guilt. But honestly, I don't entirely see it that way. I see these characters, again Laura excluded, as victims. Victims of the circumstance they were put in without any proper help. And I'm not condoning their actions, but it is very clear that these people were abused to the point that they couldn't take it anymore. And I found myself relating to them quite a bit. And so from this point forward, we're gonna get a bit real. But again, this is my interpretation. Starting with Eddie. Clearly, he isn't the most educated person. From the way he speaks, you can see they, the devs, kind of put him in this bumbling idiot kind of persona. So because of this, his character was teased constantly. He was teased for his looks, for being overweight, and just his overall lifestyle. And I can heavily relate to this. As growing up, I was heavily teased for being skinny, for being a nerd, and being shy. I got teased because of my name, teased and made fun of because of religion, and so much more. You try being named Christian and being forced to go to Hebrew school because your mother remarried and converted. It just doesn't work. Everyone has their breaking points. I started reaching mine in middle school. I began to fight back. No longer accepting the teasing and bullying, I would retaliate if somebody laid a hand on me, which often landed me in suspension. But it was during a basketball game, I was point guard for 3 years in middle school, where I finally snapped. One of the kids on the other team who was bigger than me, I was 5'6", 120 pounds, and he was 6 foot, 250 pounds, was teasing me and hitting me when no one was looking, and so I had enough. I jumped on him and began punching. not stopping because all I saw was red. All I heard was the constant sounds of teasing. Everything I felt, I made sure he felt. The coaches and parents jumped off the bleachers, our teammates pulling us apart. And once separated, they asked me what happened and I told them. They ended up throwing him out of the game and sat me out for a quarter of the game. My friends who were at the game told me they'd never seen me like that. And then later I remember telling my dad that I wanted to really hurt that kid for everything. But it was also there that I realized that I couldn't let things like that get to me. And that I couldn't be that person. And since my parents now realized it too, I actually had help. Eddie, on the other hand, didn't have that help. And that lack of empathy from others and keeping everything inside led him to his breaking point, which led him to killing the bully's dog and then shooting the bully in the knee, crippling him. Eddie flees and ends up in Silent Hill. It is in Silent Hill where his nightmares come to life. This isn't because of any guilt for what he's done. I actually believe it to be the opposite. Silent Hill is bringing out all of Eddie's worst desires, which affects his already crippled mental state. In this world, Eddie sees that he can kill his bullies, or at least his manifestations of them, without any remorse. This leads to his eventual encounter and death by James. Eddie's tragedy is what happens when a person needs help but has no one around to do so or understand. James adds to Eddie's insecurities as he is unable to empathize with the insanity that Eddie is succumbing to. It's also in this fight where Eddie says something that doesn't make sense other than to explain Silent Hill to James. Eddie tells him that just like him, James wouldn't be here if he didn't have anything on his conscience. The reason this doesn't fully make sense is because while Eddie ran, he did so out of fear for what he did, not remorse. Angela is the first person James meets in Silent Hill, which makes it seem like they entered around the same time. But unlike Eddie and James, she seems to get affected by the town the earliest. Angela's story isn't one I can outright relate to, but I can understand it. She was raised in an abusive household, beaten and, a word I can't say because of YouTube demonetization, so let's just say forced on, by her father. This trauma eventually led to her retaliation and eventual killing of her father in self-defense. This is a story that you hear about in real life all too often, and the game does a good job in showing how this can affect a person. As she got older, her psyche breaks down, and she has a distrust towards men as shown when James saves her from her manifestation of her father. She lashes out at James, saying he only wants one thing from her just like all the others. All of this pain and suffering has led Angela to have some mental issues, which led to her having thoughts of suicide due to her feeling of lack of self-worth. Keeping all of this inside and never having any help in dealing with her struggle is what led her to Silent Hill, as she was looking for her mother, who seemed to be her only safety net. Now this is where I can relate to Angela. And since not many people know this about me, it's confession time. A few years back, I suffered from heavy depression. I constantly felt alone, despite being married and having children. I always felt unimportant as no one ever made an effort to contact me, not my family, nor my friends. If I ever wanted to talk to someone, I had to reach out to them. And anyone who has suffered through depression knows and can understand how hard that is. Because even when you do reach out, you pretend everything is okay. Well, my depression had gotten the better of me. And one afternoon, I decided to go to the kitchen and grabbed a knife to cut my own wrists. No one was home. My wife was at work, the kids were at school. And as I sat on the floor with the knife pressed on my arm, my dog Zelda came up to me and jumped on me, pushing me down, and proceeded to lick my face, something she hadn't done since she was a puppy. She continued to do so till the point it made me start laughing and drop the knife. Zelda saved me. And after that moment, I never picked it up again other than to eat food. Zelda sadly passed away earlier this year at the age of 12. And I miss her dearly. But because of her, I'm much stronger now than I was before. Angela was not that fortunate, however. And as she succumbed to the torment of being in her own personal hell that was brought to life from Silent Hill, she finally takes her own life. But not before meeting James one final time, where James is now able to see what's in her own mind as he enters her other world, which is literal hell covered in fire, saying that this is how it is for her, always. And that leaves us with James and Mary. And, well, Laura too, but that is going to bring us back to the things I didn't like, so let's talk about James and Mary first. When I see James and Mary, I tend to look at their relationship. While together in life, they seem to have a very good and close marriage. It also seemed to leave James broken when his wife fell ill. Seeing his wife dying before his eyes was traumatizing. And seeing her own mental state begin to deteriorate as she no longer felt herself took the biggest toll when she started saying to James that she wanted to die. Not being able to deal with his wife being bedridden and left to die, James took it upon his own hands to end Mary's life by smothering her to death. Shortly after this, James convinces himself that Mary sent him a letter urging him to come to Silent Hill, despite her being dead in his mind for 3 years. So he travels to Silent Hill, where they took a vacation, and begins to look for her. Looking at how James repressed his memories doesn't really show his guilt for killing Mary. Even at the end of the game, he doesn't really show much remorse for it. What does show to me is that in his mind, his wife died when she initially fell ill around 3 years ago. Now, everyone who played this game seems to constantly push that James's manifestations are due to his sexual frustrations, and while that might be partly true, I don't fully see it that way. They say that after a while of not seeing someone, you begin to forget their face. And in James's case, he stopped seeing his wife 3 years ago. While he may have visited Mary in the hospital, he could no longer bear to look at her because she didn't look like his wife. The reason I bring this up is because of the nurse manifestations. I believe he is seeing the nurses as a result of constantly being around nurses as they took care of Mary. And with his disassociation to the situation, he never put any faces to the nurses. Nor did he pay any attention to how Mary looked, instead replacing them with disfigured faces. You can also tell James's journey through Silent Hill isn't about him atoning for his sin of murdering his wife, but more about acceptance to the fact that he neglected her while she was alive in her last few years. And even though he was there visiting, she was aware that he had mentally distanced himself, which in turn damaged her own mental state. And in realizing what he had done, he was able to break down that mental block he had built as a form of self-preservation. This in turn allowed him to see the note he had been carrying around for what it truly was: Mary's final words to him. And here is where I again relate to this story, and can understand the pain of watching someone waste away while not being able to do anything to help. You see, my grandfather passed away very recently, And even though I was very close to him, I didn't seem to be affected by his passing. You see that while he was in his final year, I had to watch as he deteriorated in front of me. I had to watch as he could no longer properly walk, no longer use the restroom by himself, no longer eat properly, no longer play with my daughters anymore. I had to watch him be in pain, watch him suffer, and as he could no longer speak well and slowly forget who I was, he would start to signal to me that he wanted to die. He would do this by pointing at himself and running his index finger across his throat. It was painful to watch. So my mind built a protective subconscious wall to protect itself. To me, in my mind, my grandfather had died months before his actual passing. I didn't recognize it at first, and when he did pass and everyone was crying, I couldn't. I told my wife something felt off. Something was wrong. Because I'm a very emotional person and I normally would have been torn up. It took me a few days after his passing to realize what was going on. And once I did, I told my wife that it will hit me. And when it does, it's going to hit me hard. And when that happens, I'm going to need her. At his wake, it wasn't until I noticed a chessboard set up next to him that those walls started to break. Whew. You see, growing up, I spent a lot of time playing chess with him. And because of him, I joined the chess team in high school. So seeing this chessboard set up with no one playing it started to get to me. Then my uncle came up next to me and moved one of the pawns 2 spaces forward. He looked at me and said, "That's how he always started his games." My response being, "I know. That's where I got it from." It was this moment that broke the wall and everything finally hit me. That I should have played chess with him that final year while he still could play. And that I won't be able to anymore. Much like how James realized he should have been there mentally and emotionally for Mary. Now we could talk about the different manifestations of the common creatures, but honestly, I really don't want to, as for me, they didn't really matter much in the grand scheme of things. And speaking of useless things, let's shift over to Laura. Laura honestly serves 2 purposes. One, to give James a reason to roam Silent Hill, and to show that Silent Hill has no effect on children. So let's discuss how both of these things fail to actually affect the narrative itself. If you remove Laura from the game, nothing would really change, except I would be happier and enjoy the game a bit more. James, without Laura, would still be exploring Silent Hill anyways, as he searches for Mary. The whole subplot with Laura searching for Mary as well serves as nothing to really move the story forward. On top of that, most people wouldn't really pick up the fact that the town has no effect on Laura. She can freely move about and never encounters any creatures due to her bitchy innocence. And as such, she never sees anything the adults see, including Mary, as Mary is a manifestation of James at this point. The only manifestation that is hinted that Laura can see is Maria. But this isn't certain, as we don't see the 2 together. Laura fails as a character, and if I could play a version without her in it, I would be very happy. And since we've made it back full circle to the things that I didn't like about the game, I do want to say that I really enjoyed the game. Hell, The ending with Mary narrating her letter made me cry. And any game that can get me that invested deserves a place on my must-play list. But I do have to say I actually enjoyed playing the first one a bit more. And this is because the first game was an easier game to follow. The story didn't have all these twists and turns to it like Silent Hill 2, and the exploration in the first one felt better, where Silent Hill 2 felt more linear. Though there isn't anything wrong with linear games. And while I did have issues with the game, I feel like it more than makes up for it in everything else it does extremely well. The environments are a massive improvement over the first game, as well as the audio design. But overall, as I stated before, to me, the game doesn't live up to the hype that everyone puts it at. And honestly, that's not really the fault of the game, but the community itself. Because when you put something so high up on a pedestal, there's no way for it to meet those expectations. And that's okay. The game is still a wonderful ride, and one that, even when you step off, it will still leave you thinking about it. And maybe after I play the third game, my thoughts might change on this one. Or perhaps I'll revisit this game when it isn't so fresh in my mind, and it might change my perception of it. I mean, stranger things have happened after all. For example, over the years, I've come to appreciate Resident Evil Survivor more than when it released. And if you're still here, thank you so much for hanging out with me while I talk about my experiences of the game. And I'm not gonna lie, when I first sat down to make this video, I was expecting to be taking a dump all over this game. But in writing my thoughts, it became so much more. And if you enjoyed my journey, I hope you leave a like and subscribe. And until next time, guys, happy gaming.
James, please. Please do something for me. Go on with your life. In my restless dreams, I see that town. Silent Hill. You promised you'd take me there again someday, but you never did. Well, I'm alone there now, in our special place, waiting for you. Waiting for you to come to see me. But you never do. And so I wait, wrapped in my cocoon of pain and loneliness. I know I've done a terrible thing to you. Something you'll never forgive me for. I wish I could change that. But I can't. I feel so pathetic and ugly laying here, waiting for you. Every day I stare up at the cracks in the ceiling, and all I can think about is how unfair it all is. The doctor came today. He told me I could go home for a short stay. It's not that I'm getting better. It's just that this may be my last chance. I think you know what I mean. Even so, I'm glad to be coming home. I've missed you terribly. But I'm afraid, James. I'm afraid you don't really want me to come home. Whenever you come see me, I can tell how hard it is on you. I don't know if you hate me or pity me. Or maybe I just disgust you. I'm sorry about that. When I first learned that I was going to die, I just didn't want to accept it. I was so angry all the time, and I struck out at everyone I loved most. Especially you, James. That's why I understand if you do hate me. But I want you to know this, James. I'll always love you. Even though our life together had to end like this, I still wouldn't trade it for the world. We had some wonderful years together. Well, this letter has gone on too long, so I'll say goodbye. I told the nurse to give this to you after I'm gone. That means that as you read this, I'm already dead. I can't tell you to remember me, but I can't bear for you to forget me. These last few years since I became ill, I am so sorry for what I did to you, did to us. You've given me so much, and I haven't been able to return a single thing. That's why I want you to live for yourself now. Do what's best for you, James. James, you made me happy.
It's getting to me. It got to me. Oh, it got to me. A little epilogue here before we go. If you or anybody you know is suffering from depression, please, I urge you to either reach out to them or to find a way to get some help, because nobody deserves to suffer alone. With that, thank you.